Welcome to Story Hour, a virtual meetup hosted by Wolf and Heron.
All right, so a few years back, my best friend and I had this idea we're going to ride motorcycles from Crested Butte to the south of Mexico, dual sport motorcycles. And we, on a nice, warm October 30th day, we took off from Crested Butte, headed south. Day two got interesting already. Out in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico on a dirt road, I went over a cattle guard right down the middle, slipped off a little bit off the two plates, dented my front rim, started having air coming out of it. And so I pull over, and I'm like, great, I'm gonna have to take off the tire and do a tube, and all of a sudden I see gas coming out of behind the fairings. I'm like, oh, great. So take off the fairings, look at it, I break off this little piece of my fuel line, just this little tiny piece, odd piece, breaks, and it's like tucked away in this little spot. And we spend about an hour trying to fix it, glue it, tape it, whatever we can do. It ain't happening. And basically, I'm not going anywhere. So we get to that point in time. Now, when things like this happen and you're out in the middle of nowhere, it can be a little stressful, especially when the daylight's fading in the afternoon. So there's two paths you can take at this point. You can deal with whys. You can deal with the, oh, why did I go over the cattle guard that way? Why am I out here in the middle of nowhere at this time of day? Why don't I have enough food? Why don't I have enough water? Why don't I have blah, 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 right? Or you can deal with because. At that point in time, I have a feeling that the because it leads you a lot better to the current present if you start dealing with because. And the nice thing about that is once you're in the present, you can deal with your new reality. My reality at this time, after a little bit of panicking, a little bit of talking back and forth, is it's late afternoon. It's 1st of November, 30 miles from pavement on a dirt road, 70 miles from any type of town that might have a tow truck and or something to rent to pull my bike. No cell coverage. So the reality is Jay's leaving. Jay's leaving to find cell coverage or to find a tow truck. And guess where I am? I'm staying. That's my new reality. I am in the desert, and that's where I'm living until Jay comes back with a tow truck or somebody comes back. So what do I got to do then? Okay, again, because I'm in the desert, what do I got to do? Food, water. I'm fine. Reality. Next morning, I'll be picked up. I can live without food or water for 12 hours. Not a problem. Sleeping, not so much. We don't have camping gear, but I got a space blanket. I got moto gear. I'll be okay. It won't be comfortable, but I'll make it through. Elements. Here's where it comes to play. It's going to be cold. So I got to build a fire, which means I got to build a fire pit, which means I got to collect wood, which means I always carry a lighter, always carry a lighter. Moral of the story, before anything, always carry a lighter. So if you get out there. So I did that. I just sat down and I go, okay, let's assess my food, my sleeping situation. I put the bike up on a stand. I set it up so I could sleep. I put up my fireplace. I went out and collected a bunch of wood. And dealing with that because, not dwelling so much in the whys, like, why am I out here? Why is this happening to me? Why? I'm dealing with the because. I'm in the present. I'm dealing with my new reality. The nicest thing about this is that you start getting clarification. You start clarifying exactly what matters in that point in time. And I believe that this is where leadership starts, is people's ability to deal first off in the because, in the realities of the moment, in what we have to solve at this time and point. If you don't do that for yourself, if you can't bring yourself back away from all the emotional whys into the because, it's really hard for you to lead anybody else through anything. And the nice thing about it is with that clarification, I was able to sit back and notice and really take in one of the most beautiful sunsets I've ever seen. And to this day, I actually remember it completely. I remember everything about that sunset. And right about dark, I was just about to get ready to start my fire. And here came some lights on the horizon. And I was actually a slight bit disappointed that I wasn't going to be able to spend the night out in the backcountry because I knew it was a tow truck. And sure enough, it was. And that was a whole nother adventure. getting my ass out of there in the back of a little trailer on a truck, but we'll save that for another time.
Yay! Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for going first.
No worries.
Okay, let us do feedback. And to remind us all, we are going to begin the feedback by talking about what Bart did well, what was effective, what was powerful, how did he use his superpowers, what did you appreciate about his storytelling? What did he do well first?
Nothing. Sweet.
Stephanie.
So I think this came up last time when you also tell the story, is that your storytelling style is really lovely. It's quite personable and feels both prepared and informal at the same time. And so I feel very involved in your story because of how you tell it. You have this persona, this energy that is a little bit funny and you're like very relaxed, and so all of that just comes across in your storytelling in a way that makes it very inviting to be an audience member.
Cool, thanks.
What else? Yes, Stephen.
Yep.
I found it very easy to follow. Like the last time you spoke, it was, I didn't have to take notes or anything. You dragged my head right along. The story is there. There's nothing complicated or jumping around. It's direct and folksy and very relatable.
Thanks.
I'll raise my hand. I appreciated that you tied in the theme of leadership, not in the most obvious place, which is the beginning and the end, and like a very common go-to, but you were finessing it in throughout, and that is tricky and less obvious. And so I really, really appreciate that you did that. I think that's like next level if you can do that effectively. So I thought that was really interesting.
Okay. Yeah, the story originally was a story more about it's something. The why, the not why because is a theme that I use in teaching building science.
Right.
Like, I'm not worried about why we got here. I'm worried about because we are here and how we fix it from there. And but I never thought of it in a leadership context. It was more new. It was more new reality. Based.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's interesting. And what I would suggest that you examine going forward is, what is the leadership version of the not why because story, right? That's a question. And that would be maybe like the next version of the story you told today. But then also, what is the leadership version of just this experience? Try to like release the not why because from your brain, because that's probably like imprinted a bit. And just think about that experience from the perspective of leadership. That might show you something new about that moment. But it's very common for experiences and memories and stories to have the potential for multiple themes, and it is quite interesting and part of having it be an influential story to be able to try to narrow that down and also weave it through effectively.
I think one of the really powerful things about the process of story creating and story building is that if you are told, here's your theme, now make your story fit the theme, it does actually force you to see your story and your experience from a different point of view. And it can be quite amazing in terms of how it can enrich that experience for you, and actually help you to rewrite the story in a lot of ways. And so it is a fun exercise to always be trying, well, what would this story be if I was telling it from this point of view or that point of view? And just let that be something that you make yourself do on occasion.
Yeah, I definitely changed the order of events.
Yeah.
Like how they happened. Yeah, for sure. Yep.
John, go ahead.
I just think this kind of echoes what Stephanie said a little bit. And hi, Bart, by the way, we haven't met. I'm John.
Hi.
Oh,
How's it going,
sorry.
I think that your body language and like inflection, you come across as a natural storyteller, and it's you have like a disarming and engaging manner of speaking. So I have a monotone, so that's like one of the things that I always get feedback on is like, I'm a writer, so it doesn't matter that much that I have a monotone voice, but I have to like really try and kick myself when I'm telling a story to an audience or giving a presentation.
Thanks.
Steven,
Steve.
sure.
I just want to make an observation that your story was about leadership, and yet you were the only person in the story. And it's a very odd way to talk about leadership. I guess you were talking about leading yourself, but by extension, we could understand that you were certainly talking about leading others into this methodology of using the realities and the becauses and going from there. But it's cute that you managed to make this theme out of a situation in which there's no one else there.
So what could Bart experiment with, or what helpful critique can we offer?
I think what would be interesting and what would really draw me in from the beginning is, instead of telling the story from beginning to end, start out with that crisis point. It's late afternoon, I'm 30 miles from any paved road, I'm 70 miles from any kind of service station, I've got no cell service, got a busted dirt bike and no camping gear, and then take us back to, this is how I got here, and then this is how this situation was ultimately resolved. But like opening up that story loop with by bringing us into that crisis point is more of a hook,
All right. That makes a lot of sense. I like that.
What other ideas do you guys have? Milo, and then Steven.
So I just want to take an additional perspective. I didn't get the sense that the story was easy to understand. And the reason that I say that is because the way that you kind of went through it, for a person who understands all of the terms and the scenario and the environment that you were in, I feel like it makes sense. Like if you were telling me the story, I'd be like, yeah, cool. What kind of ATV was it? Like what sort of like shoes were you wearing? Because I'm a gearhead and like and all these things. But I feel like when you're talking to somebody who may not be so familiar with the scenario, as you're rattling that stuff off, I feel like, and I wrote it down over here, I feel like if you can kind of stop after you say something and allow the people who are listening to appreciate what you're saying, I feel like that can paint the picture a little bit more. And perhaps that's why Steven was so engaged, because he is, similarly a person who is adventurous, so he's familiar with all the terms. Like you said, you went over the cattle. What was it called?
Cattle guard.
Yeah, the cattle guard, right? So the cattle guard is something that will probably trip somebody up. So in their mind, they'll be trying to figure it out, and you're already 2 sentences ahead, providing more more details. So I always feel like you should be distilling your story down so that a general audience that is unfamiliar with your expertise is able to appreciate it. And a lot of times that really just comes with your pacing.
All right. Awesome.
Steven, go ahead.
I have just a tiny grammatical point to make. Your whole theme was about the you can either choose the whys or the becauses, and you used that sentence early on when the dilemma starts. You're now in a pickle and you're ready to launch into your theme. You can either use the whys or the becauses to guide your thought process. However, the first time you used that sentence, you didn't put the two alternatives together. you said you can either use the whys, and then you spent a good 30 seconds talking about whys, and then you finish the sentence much later, or you can use the becauses. And I would just recommend that you summarize your little theme crisply and then elaborate. So you use the sentence, you can either use the whys or the becauses here. And by the whys, I mean, and spend your 30 seconds on that. And then we already know the two things, and we're expecting something you're going to move on to becauses. It gives structure to that little minutes worth of discourse.
All right. Awesome.
Stephanie.
Go ahead, Steph.
Since we're talking grammar, the other word choice that I would play with, and this is an experiment because I don't know what's necessarily the best answer, but there's a moment in the story where you flipped from using first person to using second person. And so there was something, I actually forget exactly what the detail was, but you said something like, well, and then when this happens, you can either do this or you can do that, versus I can do this or I can do that. Okay. Right. And I think there's power in second person voice and there's power in first person voice. I think there is not as much power in flipping between the two. And so pick one and stick with it. All and right. I don't know, the experiment would be to try both ways and see what happens.
No, totally. I can understand that. Yeah.
John.
Another thing that would help to draw us more into the moment is more sensory language. Like, you didn't describe the landscape really, and I'd be interested in like what did you smell? What did you see? You said it was the most beautiful sunset you'd ever seen, so like describe a little bit about the color that the sun cast on the rocks and the landscape, or like the smell of, sagebrush or whatever, like, and were you in, did the shadows play weird tricks on your eyes? What did you hear? Was it completely silent? Or could you hear like wildlife, of any kind, and just like all that, really kind of helps to visualize more vividly what you were going through, and kind of in a way increases the stakes.
Another thing, if I think back to my experience listening to your story that relates to both what Stephanie just shared and what John shared, is that it felt like you were recalling and there was a distance between you and the story. And so I think it would be helpful for you, for everything that they just suggested, to, before you go into telling the story, try to like mentally take yourself back there. Try to think about what was around me, what was I thinking, what was I feeling, and try to be present in the moment. And that will help you be more in the mindset of, I'm thinking this, more in the mindset, I'm seeing this, I'm feeling this, more in the mindset of this is really happening, as opposed to like a remembrance, something where you already have the conclusion in your head. And then the trick there, though, is to weave in the lesson or the theme somehow and still keep that connected. But I think you want to dive a little bit deeper into the present moment with that story.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because a lot of the stuff you guys are bringing up a lot of that detail is in the full story as written. But in 5 minutes, it's like, okay, what am I cutting out?
It's the trick.
So it's the trick of like integrating all that in that 5, also like you're saying, like instead of just saying, replacing one thing with another, that's a little bit more visually descriptive.
Generally, the rule is when you're trying to decide what details to include and what details to exclude, focus on the ones that bring to life your theme.
Okay.
And get rid of everything else that doesn't bring to life your theme. So if you're trying to talk about I mean, there were sort of two themes in this story. There was the why versus because, and then there's also this, what is leadership and what does it look like? And maybe there actually leadership is to do the why versus because thing. But like, if you can lean your details into what happens when you do why, what happens when you do because, right? And what are the sort of the experiences that you then have as a result, that helps to bring your theme to life. And that's where you can play with what are the details to include or not.
Well, and or setting the stakes for why because is relevant. So like the stakes of being in a situation that's rather desolate is relevant because you need to find your way out of that, right? So that's where you might lean into detail as well.
Well, like talking about how the shadows were, like growing longer as the sun, descended. I mean, or whatever, like, or the sunset cast a brilliant, red light over the rocks or whatever. Like some of that, I mean, it's hard to decide what are details for their own sake and what are details that really enhance the story. I don't think it's like black and white, because I think details for their own sake, at least if you're running through a first draft, because there's a lot of room in the middle of the playing. There's a lot of room between Charles Dickens, like annoyingly descriptive and verbose, and then like just giving people a blank canvas that they have to fill in the landscape in their mind's eye with. You can.
Yeah, there's a line in West with the Night where Burl, it's a really simple sentence, and I used to have it up on my desk, and I took it down a while ago to change out some stuff, and it basically, she said, this time of year the night tramples heavily on the heels of day, and you're like you get it. It's like right there, boom, done. Like there's no reason to go anymore. So it's a reminder that a few words can explain a lot. So
even tougher when you're trying not to memorize them too, though.
Oh yeah.
Well, thank you again. Thank you guys for the feedback.
Visit wolfandheron.com to find out more about our story hours.